Hello and welcome, everybody. So this is Lacey here on the Your Line Matters podcast. And I'm virtually sitting at a table with some really, really awesome people here. I'll just let you know who I'm sitting here with. This is technically episode 1. This is the home opener, as I call it, and have referred to the other people virtually sitting with me as. I've got Cassidy Colbert with a T. I've got Rich Johannesen and Matt Sabatello, and you guys know them from the Tick Bootcamp podcast. And Cassidy actually also has a podcast. So I'm technically sitting here with 3 other podcasters that are helping the Lyme and co-infection community in various ways. I couldn't be more excited about the table that I'm sitting at. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Happy to be here.
Welcome, and thank you so much. This is going to be what we call a triple, so 3 aired podcasts. So it's going to air on 3 different podcasts. It's going to air on my new up and running Your Line Matters podcast. It's going to air on the Tick Bootcamp podcast. And it's also going to air on the It Goes Without Saying podcast that Cassidy runs as well. So you can catch this on multiple different platforms, and we're all in it to get it out there to as many people as possible. So Cassidy's going to kind of dabble a bit of answering questions. She's going to be hosting as well. So we're both equal hosts, but we'll jump in as needed. And then, so the microphones have turned in that we're actually technically going to be interviewing Matt and Rich on this one. That's something I've been curious about for quite a long time. And I'll just kind of quickly jump into it about how I met Matt and Rich. I was flailing around here in Canada in my Lyme and co-infection journey. And I did luck out. I found a Facebook group that was super helpful. And then I also came across this person's Instagram, and she was saying, hey, I've got a virtual support group. Do you want to join this? Just click this link. And so I hadn't put much thought into it. I was like, sure, I'm going to click this link. I'm going to join this kind of virtual support group. And then that's when in the screen, I think I met Matt first. And then Rich actually popped in on some of those sessions too. Feel free to jump in any point in time there for so anyways, what I found happened, that support group was super helpful for me because it was so casual, actually. It's just like, hey, it's not official. It's just, you could talk about whatever you want, in whatever order. And I found that I knew Matt had mentioned like, hey, I have a podcast, but if I'm being honest, I didn't listen to any podcasts at that point in time. I was like, oh, podcast. Okay, cool. Yeah. Like I'll get around to that. And then Matt and Rich kind of came in there more. And what we found some days is sort of dropping like flies, the other group members, as we were chatting about these topics, like super in depth, like the query of sexual transmission and Lyme disease. I literally can still picture the screen, and it was just dropping like flies. It's like gone. And then there'd be me and Matt, or me, Matt and Rich left there. Everyone else just literally signed out and left. They're like, okay, thank you. Like you've gone deep enough into this topic. So that's how I met Matt and Rich. And so even then, I still wasn't really into social media. Like I started an Instagram, I put a few posts and then I stopped. And then I went over to their platform on Tick Bootcamp, and I kind of went, oh, okay. Yeah, they really do have a podcast. And this podcast is quite amazing in what it does. So any additions to how we met that I might be forgetting?
I want to jump in here because I've got something to add.
Okay,
so anybody who knows us and has listened to this podcast or knows us personally knows that we have no filter. There's no limit to what we talk about. And I remember on those Zoom calls, that Lyme support group, that I wanted to geek out and learn from people what they were doing to heal, and also hear their experiences to learn from them. And I don't know if you know this, Lacey, but Rich and I learned a couple of months after those groups that some of the people on the call were getting uncomfortable about the discussion of sexual transmission of Lyme.
Oh,
so, I won't go into the details, but,
okay,
just kind of giving a little bit of a heads up here. This podcast is going to be unfiltered. We're going to be honest and open about our experiences because that's what we feel the community needs to hear. But yeah, that was a very fun discussion, and we really enjoyed those discussions we had back then in that Lyme group. So that was a fun time.
Okay, so now you piece together, hence the dropping of flies. Now I understand why. So yeah, thank you for filling me in on that.
And of course, it is triggering for folks who are going through all that they're going through to think that it's possible that they could infect someone else. Well, they could have been infected based on having intimate contact with someone. And, we understand, that in addition to everything else you're dealing with, having fear of intimate contact and how that could affect someone else is something that may be overwhelming to folks who are new to the community.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I can see also how it could be a triggering subject for sure, just based on the interactions I've seen in social forums and such. So it's a heated topic, definitely. So that's how we met. And then Matt and Rich looped me into Cassidy's world here in that they've known Cassidy. Do you guys want to say briefly how you and Cassidy met?
Very well, Cassidy, we met right from the very beginning of
Yeah.
Big Boot Camp podcast. We were contacted by Cassidy, who was doing some work with one of the awesome Lyme organizations, Leaf, and she was kind enough to set up a really, really powerful interview for us with her good friend Nancy, and we then became good friends through doing that work, and we later interviewed Cassidy herself, and we had the blessing of actually physically meeting in person Cassidy and Nancy, who were recognized actually by our community for the great work they're doing in the Lyme community generally, and for teaching Lyme awareness to the children in our community. So that's how we met Cassidy almost 5 years ago.
Let me give another fun fact here. I'm sharing all kinds of fun stuff. So Cassidy, I don't know if you know this, and hope I don't embarrass you by telling you this, but after we first met you, Rich just couldn't get over how vibrant and energetic you were. And just your energy. He said, I can't believe the energy of Cassidy, the positivity, the hope, the inspiration that oozes out of Cassidy. And that's what I remember still to this day from 5-6 years ago when we met Cassidy, is just your energy and your willingness to help and want to give back to the community. So it was a really fun experience for us.
Well, thanks, guys. I had such a fun time coming and meeting you guys, and I still have. It's at my parents' house. It's the only thing I have left in my old bedroom is like the proclamation of, it was like Cassidy Colbert Day is what the town gave it. And like Nancy had Dr. Nancy Fox Day. And it was just like such a wild experience. And then we've kept in touch. Like, I feel like we talk every few months, and I'm always bothering you guys when I have any Lyme related issues. And I send people to take boot camp at least once a month. Like, I get people that ask me questions like, I have a tick bite, and I just boop, boop, or I'll get their email and I sign them up for the take boot camp emails. I'm like, you need this in your life. So I am very grateful for all of you guys and the work that you do. And I agree with you, Lacey, that it's so funny because Matt and Rich are so just humble. But then when you like look at take boot camp and all that they have accomplished in such a short amount of time too, it's wild. And you guys are really truly leading the drive for the Lyme community. So we thank you.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say.
Yeah. So I will have a quick question here, just a quick jump in. So did Matt and Rich, was it strategic that you chose to host this, two people that are self-proclaimed awkward human beings, or was that unintentional? Because I didn't know this. When you guys said reach out to Cassidy, I did, and I saw on her media she mentioned awkward human being. My people that know me, 100%, they'd be like, oh, you're really awkward in that interaction. I'm like, no, I'm fine. I feel good. They're like, oh, it was pretty awkward. So was that, the question is, was that intentional or unintentional?
It was unintentional. It's just because we're both so awkward, we didn't realize you're awkward.
I'm gonna say that I think in order to have a podcast, you have to be awkward in some shape or form, and that's how you end up podcasting.
Nice.
Yes.
Okay.
We tried to remove our awkwardness in the beginning, and we were horrible. When we just accepted the fact that we're weirdos and we showed our true weirdness on our podcast is when we had a lot of listeners. So anybody listening, be weird, be yourself. That's all I'm saying.
There you go. Words of inspiration. Yeah. But anyways, I guess we should sort of jump into a little bit of your story, Matt and Rich. So I did do my homework. I listened to your interview on Cassidy's podcast. So I saw you guys. What I'll do is I'll just sort of send people there because you guys did such a good background of what is Lyme disease and some of the things around that. So I will send people there to Cassidy's podcast to check that out. And so basically, if starting from scratch, so you guys are located Long Island, New York, is correct? Hopefully I got that right. That's what I wrote on my notes. So and then so if you guys, I know you guys have told your story a few times here, so your story, so fill us in. So how did it all start? Lyme disease, I know you and Matt connected. sort of brief us from the start, and then we'll jump in as needed.
So I think it's how it begins is Matt and I actually worked together on a political campaign. Matt is the nephew of one of my good friends, and I was charged with running a campaign for a local environmentalist who I didn't believe, and I don't think anyone believes, had a shot in the world at winning the campaign. So we were trying to put together a bootstrap effort to run a campaign against, believe it or not, a campaign that was being run by a billionaire. Matt was kind enough, after just having graduated from his graduate school program, to join the effort to swim upstream and try to elect a local environmentalist. And as luck would have it, or as God would have it, we won. The campaign that couldn't be won, where we were outspent more than 14-1, and a national campaign working against us, we won the campaign. So Matt and I had a very nice experience together, where Matt was running the IT element of the campaign, and I was the campaign manager. But then we moved on with our lives, because I'm old and Matt's young, and my children would make fun of me if I hung out with Matt.
They still make fun of us, by the way.
They do.
Do they?
We didn't see each other for probably about 10 years. There was a long gap in time between the early work we did together and then our reconnection. And we were reconnected through that same group of people, but this time it was because Matt had become chronically ill. He was unable to work, and his employer was about to discharge him for various reasons related to his chronic illness. And I was asked if I could help Matt to defend himself, which was kind of a weird question, because your listeners will soon find out Matt never shuts up. So I really couldn't understand how this very articulate, very talkative, very intelligent person would need help to defend himself. That was odd. And so I contacted Matt. I invited him to come into my office, and it was shocking. The physical transformation that Matt had gone through was shocking. I quite frankly would not have recognized him if I saw him in the supermarket had I not known he was coming in. And he was just so sick. Just,
so are you
sick.
able to give our listeners a little bit? So I know it was shocking if it's not difficult for either of you, but from the outside looking in, what does that sort of look like? Like, does he look frail?
He went from being an uber fit young man, very, very fit young man, to being a fat old man. But more than just his physical appearance, a physical transformation. Matt lost his hair. He gained a tremendous amount of weight. I literally would not have recognized him had I bumped into him in the supermarket. But I think the thing that was most upsetting about that meeting was that he was suffering from such brain fog and from such neurological impairment that he couldn't speak. If I didn't have background from the person who had called me to let me know that Matt was suffering from Lyme disease and that he had become chronically ill, I would not have enough information from him to understand what his needs were when he came into my law office seeking help. It was horrible. It was just horrible. And Matt began to explain to me things that he had to endure, like being unable to get out of his bed, being unable to get to the bathroom without assistance. He was so neurologically impaired he couldn't watch video or TV. He had suffered seizures and had been removed with an ambulance and hospitalized because of seizures. And these things were shocking to me, because although I grew up on Long Island and I've been aware of ticks and been bitten by ticks, quite frankly, my entire life, I had no idea that Lyme disease could present in such a horrific chronic form, and watching that materialize in front of me was just terrible. It was so sad. It was hard for me not to cry.
Yeah, and I'll kind of fill in the gaps there a little bit from the time before I met Rich, because it was shortly after our experience on the campaign that I became ill. And it was really the first symptom I had was I'd be running. I was a big jogger, and I'd faint and I'd just wake up. and I wouldn't remember anything. Went to all kinds of doctors, couldn't make heads or tails of it, and it was only exercise-induced fainting. Then it progressed where I just had other weird neurological symptoms, light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, but none of the typical Lyme symptoms. I didn't have the aches and pains. I didn't have the inflammation or the joint pain that you traditionally hear about Lyme disease. It was very much neurological. I mean, I remember being in the grocery store and just, it was a common occurrence where I'd walk around and my vision would go out and I would just stop and I'd wait and it would come back and I'd go on with my life. And I was driving like that for a couple of years before my Lyme diagnosis. I remember being paralyzed and not being able to walk for a good at least hour and being with my mother and grandmother and just being like, you know what, I'm not going to call an ambulance because they can't help me. I've been in the hospital so many times, there's nothing they can do. I'll just wait it out, right? I mean, a lot of us have gone through these things, but looking back, you realize how serious it was. I had all kinds of issues with my ability to speak and process things, as Rich noted, with my cognitive abilities. I mean, Rich described the scenario very well, but my recollection is far different than Rich's. I think when I think about that scenario, oh, I was really on my game. I walked into Rich's office and I did a great job at explaining myself because I was such a sick person that I really thought I did a good job at explaining what was going on, but he had no idea what I said, right? So, neurologically and physically, I was a shell of the person I was before. I lost all my hair. I gained a ton of weight. I had acne. I mean, it was just all around. I was just a complete mess.
Wow. Yeah. And okay. So Rich, he's seeing you like this. And then what transpires from that point on? And to hear what you're saying, that those symptoms are so helpful for you to share, because there's such an array of symptoms, as we know. So I got sick with exercise, but I didn't faint. But there's got to be someone out there that got near fainting or fainted too. So that's super helpful. That's the first time I've heard that, actually. And how about you, Cassidy? Did you?
I was going to say that Matt is someone that I have gone to in the recent months because I've had a relapse with my Lyme, because I also have the paralysis and I also have the seizures, and because the symptoms with Lyme, there is such a wide range of symptoms. Sometimes it can be like, I feel like, oh, I'm the only person that has this. And so when people share the full list kind of symptoms and actual experience and walk it through like you just did, Matt, that's so helpful because I'm like, oh yeah, but that happens to me. And like the paralysis and not being able to that's why I told you guys I'm standing at my desk because I could feel it coming. And I was like, if I'm sitting down, I'll get paralyzed on this podcast, and didn't want that to happen.
Oh no,
and then
you don't want that.
Yeah. And the looking back at it and realizing how serious it actually was. But in the moment, you're in such, like, I have to fight through it kind of, you're in just survival mode. So you're like, oh yeah, no, that's fine. It's fine. I can just keep going. When we talk, I know we'll talk about it later with the mental health aspect of it, but it is really daunting to kind of look back and be like, wow. But it also feels empowering sometimes for me too. Like, oh, I did that and I persevered and made it through it. So always remember that.
So the next step in our relationship was that I had to begin to study Lyme disease as part of representing Matt in this work-related incident. And although I grew up on Long Island and I was familiar with Lyme disease, as I shared with you, I had no idea that it could present as a chronic disease. And I had to study this disease enough to represent Matt. And what I've shared with many of our friends in the past is I learned enough about Lyme disease to become dangerous and to successfully work with Matt so that his less than scrupulous employer understood that it was not wise for them to try to terminate Matt. And the finger of God did make its way into that experience because Matt, who was working in a very toxic department with many toxic people, was moved from, as part of the work we did together, he was moved from that toxic department to another department, at the same employer. But what was wonderful about that is that the person who was the director of that department also was a patient with chronic Lyme disease. And he and Matt began to work together, not only as colleagues, but also they went on a healing journey together.
Yeah. And that was, I'm still very good friends with that man to this day. And we went through a lot of our journey together, and we've helped each other. It's very much like we've helped each other through this podcast and the Lyme community that we've built. So it was a really important step for me because I was able to be in a place where I wasn't attacked. I was able to focus on healing and not have to worry about my job. So that was really an important part for me to begin my healing journey, because it was very difficult to stay employed, worry about making money, worried about how you're going to afford treatment, what is treatment, all those stresses that all of us face when we're dealing with Lyme disease.
So after that, after Matt was moved, I moved on with my life. As I said, I'm old, he's young, and we were going to avoid my children making fun of me for hanging out with someone who was just a little bit older than my oldest child. And I thought that would be the last time we see each other for another 10 years or so, I thought. And my youngest daughter was graduating from high school, and I was working in our yard and getting our yard prepared for a graduation party. And at the end of the day, I went in to take a shower, and I was washing off all the dirt and all the mulch that I was working in for that day. And I ran my hand down my right thigh, and I found an engorged tick on my leg. And although a tick bite was not a new experience for me as a native Long Islander, or almost native Long Islander, I've been living here since I'm 2. I was not Lyme woke until that time, and because I had studied Lyme disease in preparation for representing Matt, and I understood that an engorged tick meant I was being bitten for quite some time. And I also had seen what it could do to you. I had an anxiety attack in the shower, and I pulled the tick off my leg, and I had all kinds of anxiety sweat pouring out of me, and I wrapped the tick in toilet paper. Why, I don't know. And then I got on the phone and I called up Matt, and I said, Matt,
this is an important part here, Rich, though, right? What to do when you're bit by a tick? Do not be Rich. Do not panic. Because Rich called the neurologically impaired Matt Sabatello, couldn't even tell him what was going on with his health, to say, what do I do because I'm bit by a tick? Not only could I not communicate, I got bit by a tick, I got sick, and I didn't get better. So don't panic, don't be Rich, and make wiser decisions in life. No, I'm kidding.
Well, so Matt did give me some advice, however. He said to me, make sure you hold on to the tick and bring it with you to your doctor's appointment, and make sure you call your doctor and make an appointment. So I hung up the phone with Matt, and I called my doctor's office. And I, quite frankly, did not have a good experience. The gatekeeper and I had a bit of an exchange where I was demanding an appointment, and she was denying me an opportunity to go in to see the doctor, and told me that I should not go in to visit with the doctor until at least 6 weeks had passed, or until I became symptomatic. And I knew that was the wrong answer. So the gatekeeper and I went back and forth, and when I finally threatened to make sure that they couldn't go home until they saw me, she agreed to give me an appointment a couple of days later. And I waited until midweek the following week to go to my doctor's office. And I did not get to see the doctor. They only allowed me to see the PA. And we did not have a very productive first appointment. It was so bad that when I was showing the PA the tick, and I asked whether or not he wanted to look at the tick or wanted to send it out for testing, he said no. And I said, well, I'm told by somebody who has Lyme disease you should be looking at this. And he's like, no, we don't need that. Don't worry about that. I finished the appointment. He did give me 5 days of doxy, and I didn't know whether that was good or bad, whether that was enough. It wasn't enough. I mean, I just didn't know enough about what my treatment options were, and he certainly wasn't giving me any options. I then did what old men do. I went on to Amazon and I bought every book on Lyme disease. And Matt and I counted them together. I read 32 books on Lyme disease over the course of the next about 6 weeks. And that's when Matt and I developed our new relationship, because what I would do is I would read a chapter. I became obsessed with Lyme disease because I did not want to get sick. I was in a position where I had a daughter in law school, a daughter in medical school, and a daughter who was about to begin her college education. And I just couldn't get sick because I'm a self-employed small business owner, and their future was going to be limited if I wasn't going to be able to honor my commitment to paying for their education. So my obsession was to stay healthy, and my obsession was to come up with a plan, because I had a doctor's office that wasn't competent, and they weren't going to give me that plan. So what I did is I tore through these books, and each night I'd call Matt, and I'll let Matt share with you what was happening during those phone calls.
So just to kind of have some fun here, we have all those books that Rich bought when this happened. and all the new ones we've been, mailed from our podcast guests and people that we've encountered in the community. And now when we do our new YouTube channel, we record in person. We have all of these books stacked up behind us on a shelf, and it looks really cool. And to reflect on all that, I read maybe not many of them. Rich read every single one of them and started to call me every single night. And, Rich and his wife thought that he was annoying me, right? And I'm like, no, I had no life. I had no friends. All my friends abandoned me. I was still really sick. I was barely able to function and go to work. And, keep in mind, I was back at work, but I was being driven to work by family members because I wasn't neurologically cleared to drive for 2 years when I was back at work. So I had no life. This was my social life for me. Now, I started to learn from Rich as he was learning, but he wasn't learning what to do to protect himself. He wasn't learning, what do I do if I'm bit by a tick to not get sick? He's learning about the Lyme wars. He's learning about the debate, is chronic Lyme real or not? Is it a persistent infection? Is it an autoimmune disease? Or is it completely made up and psychological? So now he's getting more anxious, like, crap, what am I going to do? There's no consensus out there. There's conspiracy theories about it being a bioweapon, which we've now learned from Chris Newby and Julie Millay, who we just had on the podcast, that there's a lot of merit to those claims. But it created more fear and anxiety for Rich than anything. But what it did for me was validate me. And I'm not sure that Rich understands the level it did this for me, because prior to this, I felt like I was this weird alien. You go to the doctor, you get treated with something, diagnosed with something, and you get treated with some sort of medicine and you feel better. That's my experience with medicine from a child. Then I get sick with Lyme disease. You go to the doctor, you're called crazy for years. Then you get a diagnosis and you think, I'm going to get a treatment and I'm going to get better because that's what I'm used to. You get a diagnosis. For me, it was a treatment. It was 3 weeks or 4 weeks. It was 4 weeks. 4 weeks of IV ceftriaxone antibiotics. And I made some progress with my neurological symptoms, but I wasn't even close to the person I was before, especially cognitively. I wasn't back to who I was as far as my ability to process and read and things like that. So now I feel like I'm this weird alien. My doctors are telling me I'm technically cured of Lyme disease. And if it's something else, if I'm still not feeling well, it must be something else. So hearing all these stories from Rich, from what he's learning in these books, validated for me that I wasn't alone. And there was far more people like me in the world than I thought. So that's kind of the impact it had on me. Well, if anything, it made Rich more anxious, and it actually gave me some validation and gave me a little bit of peace, Rich.
Well, I'm glad you received some emotional support from my anxiety-producing experience, because after reading all of those books, unfortunately, I still didn't have an action plan, and I was, quite frankly, becoming increasingly anxious about not having a treatment plan and not having a competent doctor. Because at the end of reading those books, I went back to the doctor's office. It was 6 weeks later for a Lyme disease test, and I knew that it was possible that I had more than Lyme disease, and I also knew that it would have been wise to test the tick. So, as a more informed patient, I was pushing the PA for a wider array of testing, and of course tick testing, which I brought my tick back with me, and I was gaslit, quite frankly. He was not interested in doing anything other than taking some blood and sending me on my way. So what I then did is I pivoted over to Google Scholar, and I downloaded every single scholarly article I could get my hands on regarding Lyme disease. And I again thought I was annoying Matt with daily phone calls, but because I was as desperate as I was, I didn't care about annoying the young man. I cared about getting input from somebody who had been on the journey so that he can help me to come up with my action plan. We had sort of phase 2 of this relationship we developed, where the next 4 or 5 weeks I was reading scholarly materials and calling Matt with what I was, quite frankly, finding to be a really frustrating, conflicting research arena, and I simply just didn't have an action plan, which then triggered the next step in our relationship. Was Matt kept arguing to me that we should go on social media and we should start looking for people like, quite frankly, the two of you. I had no social media at the time, and quite frankly, I still have no social media other than Tick Boot Camp. My job as a parent, quite frankly, a parent of 4 daughters, has always been to try to limit their exposure to social media, because I don't think, quite frankly, it's a healthy. I don't think it's a healthy tool. So I was doing everything I could to stay off of social media. And I said to Matt, I don't really want to do that, but if truth be told, it was out of desperation. I said, all right, how can it hurt? The books are not giving me the information I need for an action plan, and the scholarly materials are not giving me the information for an action plan. How can it hurt to talk to folks on social media? And Matt was kind enough to start reaching out to other young folks and ask them if they would talk to me.
And Rich, it wasn't even just, not to be ageist here, but it wasn't even a young folk. The first person we talked to was Michelle Dates, who is still a good friend of ours, who hopped on a conference call with us to share with us what she's done to protect herself from tick bites. And we learned so much information from that one phone call. And then we just started reaching out to others. And the willingness to hop on a Zoom call, or at the time we were using 1-800-conferencecall.com, people were just so willing to hop on and help us that didn't know us from a hole in the wall, whether it was California, like Michelle, anywhere, all over the country in the US, and people even outside of the United States that were willing to help us, like you, Lacey, right in Canada, and, you name it, Europe, etc. These people were hopping on to tell us what we can do to help ourselves. But the saddest part was almost all of them were suffering from chronic Lyme. They had limited energy, and they were dedicating their precious energy to hop on a call and help us, which is something we really remember to this day, and thinking, wow, people that are healthy wouldn't give us the time of day for the most part, not stereotyping everybody, but this sick community is just so giving. So after we started speaking to these people, Rich and I started jotting down everything we learned. Then we put it into a Microsoft Word document. And then we started to talk every night and say, wow, this is something, like, this is really a helpful step-by-step guide of what to do if you're bit by a tick so you don't get sick, not just from Lyme, but from the co-infections, including things like, parasitic infections and viruses and all the things that can come along from a tick bite. And, we started building it and sharing it with people. So then on subsequent phone calls, we'd say, hey, this is what we have so far. What do you think? And people would poke holes at it and give us some more feedback. We eventually put up this really amateur website that listed it, and it started to get a ton of impressions because we put Google Analytics on it at the time. And that's when we realized, we're onto something here. This is something that Rich needed. He couldn't find in all the books that he bought. He couldn't find in any of the scholarly documents. He was pulling from all these universities and researchers and people all around the world. But now the people that have it are the people that have gone through the experience. And, we got to share with the world. What are we going to do? How are we going to share this? And how are we going to give back to this community who's been so giving to us? And that's when I finally said to Rich, I think we should start a podcast. And to circle back on your question, Lacey, which was, how did two weirdos from Long Island, New York start a podcast? It was because we couldn't think of anything else. And I was still so sick, I couldn't do more than just sit on a phone or sit on a Zoom call and talk to somebody. In fact, we didn't even share the video because I was so neurologically impaired, I couldn't watch video. And I only wanted to share audio because I thought most of the Lyme population couldn't watch video. So it was really just the first idea that came to mind. And because we are weirdos and we tried to be normal and we're not normal, it was really bad at first. And, this is some fun background information. One of our first guests that we interviewed was on site in person, and it was so bad, she had made us take it down probably, I'd say, a couple of months into it being up. And then she'd come back and say, hey, it's on Google. I found it here. Take it down here. Hey, it's over here. She scoured the internet to find old traces of it and made us take it down. So we were really, really, really bad at first. I mean, every indication was we shouldn't be doing this, because then we had somebody who was supposed to come on who was a local Long Island, leader of Lyme and tick-borne illnesses, who was just unwell, we found out later on, but basically accused us of hacking into her 1995 website, saying we stole her contacts, when an automated email went out reminding her of the appointment on the calendar, because we send an email 24 hours before the event that she thought we hacked her website. I get a scathing voicemail on my cell phone saying, you're going to be sued. I've contacted my board. I'm still really sick. I'm like, Rich, what are we doing? Why are we doing this podcast? You deal with this. It was just such a mess. So now Rich has to go and deal with this, made up lawsuit that never happened, but we kept going and going and going. And thank God for Rich, because now, this when Rich described, he started doing his research, basically from Rich's tick bite forward was the beginning of our friendship. And, fast forward almost 6 years later, Rich is one of my closest friends to this day. And, he did all this research to figure out, how can we be better? How can we help people? And he took all these courses on retention and, the hero's journey outline, and then started teaching me in a way I can understand it when I was still very neurologically impaired. And we started implementing and adopting these techniques that he learned. And then we started to see ourselves turn around, and our numbers just one day just blew up. I mean, we're over 3 million downloads to our podcast in about 5 years. And, here we are and talking to you guys, right? Doing this triple, and we'll get into how it's helped me personally and Rich personally. So I don't want to go too much, but I'll pause here for any questions that you, Cassidy, or you, Lacey, may have.
Let me just add one more piece, Lacey, because I don't think Matt's being fair to himself.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
When we had gotten to the end of what I thought was our journey together, and I was ready to move on with my life, Matt called me out, and he said, "Hey, Rich, we had at that time we interviewed approximately 30 people from various parts of the world, as Matt had said, who were kind enough to answer my question, which was, what would you do if you had been bitten by a tick?" Well, actually, my question was, what would you do if a family member of yours that you loved was bitten by a tick? And that may sound familiar to the folks in our podcast, because that actually became the last question we asked everyone for about 400 episodes of our podcast. But at the time, this was pre-podcast. We had gotten all this information. I then had a step-by-step guide for the first time. I didn't have it anywhere else other than by interviewing these folks. And Matt said to me two things. The first thing he said to me, well, they helped you. What are you going to do to give back? Right? And that was like a slap across the face.
Right? Exactly.
That's a good line, Matt. That's a good line.
Right? So that was the first thing he said. The second thing he said was, Rich, you said as a traditionally educated lawyer that the experts were either writing books or publishing articles, and you found that not to be true. Don't you think we have the duty to create a platform where the real experts can share their information? Don't you think a podcast would be the way to do that? And I said, how do I say no to that, Matt? It's like 2 for 2, right? I said, but here's the problem. We're going to suck. Are you prepared to suck, Matt? And he said, yeah, let's just do it. So, Matt is not being fair enough to himself, in the way that he was describing this, because he was really challenging me, and he was being willing to be vulnerable himself. And I think that's one of the most important lessons that, we'd like to pass on to folks in the community, because one of the things that's really challenging about attempting something new is that you hold yourself out to a standard that is not achievable. And it's one of the reasons we get triggered and we don't get started. And Matt, despite being very sick, and having a really challenging experience, when I said to him, "Are you willing to suck, Matt?" Because that was my way of walking him back. He said, "Yes, Rich, I'm willing to suck." And we did suck. I mean, Matt shared with you some of the experiences that we had, but quite frankly, I think one of the things we have to be willing to understand as we're going on this journey is that we have to be willing to grow. And the only way that we're going to be able to grow physically, emotionally, and spiritually is by being willing to suck, and then suck a little bit less, and suck a little bit less. And finally, we can get to a point where we can begin to learn enough about our bodies and about our brains and about our spirit, so that we can partner with medical professionals and mental health professionals so that we can heal.
I love that, because that's super relevant to the community. But me right now, the amount of pep talks I had to do leading up to today, because today is like, the big, this is episode number 1. So I had to write down notes to remind myself, and little tiny things, like I scrolled through a post and saw some people in the community had liked it. And so to put myself in a position also that I'm doing this for other people too, right? And I'm sure Cassidy can probably relate that. You guys can probably relate to that. And in addition to being able to suck, for sure. I guarantee if you have pretty severe Lyme and co-infections, you're going to not be successful at something in there at some point in time as you thought you would be. So it teases all those areas of your life. If you're used to succeeding at everything right away, Lyme disease can affect that. So I'd say ability to just suck is super important. And that's something in my pep talk that I did. And there's little notes somewhere around here that say things along those lines. Because even though I know that logically, like I'm a very logical kind of think things very slowly through, logically, my body still was like, whoosh, leading up to it. So I popped on a meditation before I came here just to get the nervous system a little bit calmer. I pet the dog. I'm like, okay, dog, it's making me calm. So, and here we all are. And I also am ready to suck too. So let's suck.
I think something also is that I have so many thoughts off of what you guys just said, but this one is first in mind, and then I'll go backwards. But knowing that you're going to have to be vulnerable, because what we're talking about is such a vulnerable thing in the experiences that we have all gone through. And like, I have a TikTok where I talk about a lot of stuff because I was like, oh, sometimes it's like a quick little 2-minute thing. And I was like, that's not worth me making a podcast episode about this 2-minute little rant that I'm going to go on, but also just sharing those things. And the thing I always say, whether it's my blog, whether it's my podcast, whether it's TikToks, whether it's being on someone else's podcast or anything, or just having a phone conversation with someone, it's if like one person gets something out of this, then that's enough for me. Because I always think back to when I first started my Lyme journey. If someone would have been there that I could have asked these questions to, or that could have been honest with me and told me their story and the real truth of what the Lyme journey is, which kind of what you were talking about, Rich, is like, I remember I was 14 when I first joined the Lyme community, and there was no consensus on anything. And it's so overwhelming, especially when you are sick. And I was so lucky to have my mom on my side, but she's also like, what is going on? And so in all our lives, you're always kind of told like, oh, doctors know best. But the one thing that I learned from having Lyme is that doctors don't always know best. In fact, they're actually mostly wrong, especially when it comes to the Lyme stuff. And it was kind of like a rewiring of the brain in that way of like, oh, question everything and being your own advocate, and having it all put into one place is so nice. And then you guys touched on the Lyme community. I'm a member of several other chronic illness communities, and not to shade them, but the Lyme community is like no other. And it really is like you said, like the sick people are the ones that are willing to help, and they are taking what little energy they have to reach out and help people. Like, look at this podcast, the table right here, like you said, Lacey.
I like this table. I'd eat at
Yes.
this table, provided you guys cook for me. No, just kidding. I'm just kidding. You don't have to. I'd eat anyways,
but using what energy to help each other. And because I also think it's all probably coming from the same place of helping make sure that information is out there for the next person. And Rich, even you, like, you don't have Lyme. You're just here helping the rest of us out of the goodness of your heart, which is so freaking amazing. And you both deserve all the praise, and you don't suck.
Yeah,
well, no,
that's my biggest takeaway.
I think it's important for all of us to understand that when we want to achieve a goal and we set an intention, that what we're often doing and what we have to do is we have to become the person that is able to do what it is that we're not capable of doing today, right? So we create an intention, and right after intention always comes disruption. And the reason disruption comes is because there's a large gap between where we are now and where we want to be. And when we look at that huge gap, in many cases, it triggers us into paralysis, right? So that's why what Matt and I have gone through, and again, all the credit goes to Matt for this podcast. It was his vision, and it was his his moonstruck moment where he slapped me and said, "How can you be a good person if you're not willing to do this?" But what we all have to understand is that there is going to be a large gap between where we want to be with our health and where we are. And the only way we're going to be able to close that gap is to set that goal for ourselves, and then understand that we're going to have to go through this disruptive process in the beginning of sucking, and being willing to suck, and being willing to just keep working day after day after day so that we can get to that place and not allow that big gap between where we want to be and where we are. And quite frankly, if you had asked us 5 years ago, after the experiences that we had in the beginning, where people were literally demanding that we take down their podcasts, we had people literally threatening lawsuits against us, and rightfully so, because we just suck so bad that it was embarrassing that people's stories would be put up that way, to where we are now, where we have 3 million downloads, right? So there are many other people who could be helping this community by starting podcasts, but they're comparing themselves to us, right? And that's why I really admire you, Lacey, because you're not comparing yourself to us. You're saying, okay, this is episode number 1. I know I'm going to suck, And I'm not comparing myself to what Rich and Matt have accomplished after 5 years. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do it, right? And what's going to happen is you're going to be able to get to that place that you want to be. But it's a model, in my view, and based on now almost 450 interviews that we've done with people who have successfully overcome challenges with their disease, is the people who are successful are the people who did what we did. They are setting a goal for themselves. They see themselves as a healthy person. They understand that they're not there now, and they understand that if they look forward to trying to today be the person they will need to be healthy, then they're going to get triggered. They're going to be in fight or flight, and they're not going to be able to take any action at all. They're going to be paralyzed. You have to be willing to suck. But that doesn't mean you don't set very high standards for yourself, and you don't set goals that will cause you to be the person having the health you want to have.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And kind of what you're saying there, you like that broader kind of goal. And sometimes for us with the neurological issues, breaking it down into tiny, like little chunks, like, oh, I might just actually, the goal today is to complete adding in this one supplement. Like some of my goals are that broken down, and still even today, because I'm sitting about, when you guys interviewed me, I was about 65. You guys queried higher than 65. I wasn't sure. Since I've talked to you guys, I'm definitely at least 75% of my pre-illness state with, to be honest, I'd say better care of myself and my nervous system. And I'm creeping between 75 and 80% here, but I just have had some setbacks. So I don't quite, I'm going to say 78-ish% healed. And so this has all come in times of illness. Like there's some days I worked on the podcast, and then there's been 2 or 3 weeks I couldn't work on it at all in a row type of thing. So it can be done. But again, I set that in my mind. I said that, and you guys actually, hey, let's intercept here. So you guys did that, created immense inspiration in me without necessarily even knowing it. You guys were just talking to me, but I was taking it. I'm like, oh, kind of like, this is possible. Like I could maybe do something. And you guys were simply just sharing information. So I'm not sure. And this is where me and Cassidy, we might have talked about this in advance, but where did you guys know that on your platform, just by speaking to people in a language, like not an actual, but Lyme and co-infection language, and understanding all of that in itself, the interview itself is actually healing for the person you're interviewing. Did you guys know that?
We didn't know that in the beginning, but we have since learned that from our guests. I mean, this has been an incredibly enriching experience for both of us. And as kind as it was for Cassidy to thank me for doing this work, which my initial commitment to Matt was 2 years and I'm done. And now we're 5 years in, and I can't imagine not doing this forever. Is because I have gotten a great deal out of this myself. It has been unbelievably enriching for me. And I can't tell you that I've had a greater blessing than at the end of a podcast, somebody telling me that it was a healing experience for them to have a conversation with us. You cannot receive a greater blessing than that type of compliment.
No, and it's been healing not only for our guests, but for us as well. And we'll get into how it's benefited both Rich and I personally with our health. I mean, we just had a gentleman today from Poland who we had on the podcast a few weeks ago reach out and say exactly what you just described, Lacey, right? This really heartfelt email saying, you guys have helped me heal. I've been listening to you since before the interview, and now I have the courage and the drive to go back and get my PhD. And I mean, this really, really heartfelt email. So, we're seeing it from all sides. On our end, we're benefiting. The guest is benefiting, but also the listeners. We get Instagram DMs, we get emails, we get YouTube comments, all kinds of stuff on a regular basis giving us that feedback. And that's how we know we're helping, right? And we're using that information to model and always try to be better and do better on the podcast to help more people. So it is a really rewarding thing to do from all different angles of the interview.
Nice. Yeah, I was curious. That was something that we were curious is if you knew that, in advance, or if that's just something that like, oh, hey, accidentally, we are literally a healing platform in every single interview we do. And so I thought that was so cool because I didn't know that coming to do the interview when you guys asked me either. I was like, oh yay, we get to talk about, some things. And I didn't know that after I would feel just like kind of a weight off my shoulders and be like, whoa, this is kind of the next step and like stages in my healing. This coming to talk on the podcast here. So yeah, so that was one thing in particular. I'm not sure if Cassidy has anything. I've got another question around that if Cassidy doesn't. So
I was just gonna say, I think along those lines of it being a healing moment for everyone, it's so important. Also, I just feel like I keep going back to the same thing of just sharing those stories is I think also the education aspect of it all. For not only like every time I'm on a call with Rich and Matt, I learn something. I learned many things. But for you guys, I know you've shared with me like the things that you have learned, but for the listeners and people that aren't actually like fully immersed in the Lyme community, what they're learning as well. But I've gone onto your guys' podcast and searched certain topics, and then I'll listen to those episodes and I'm like, whoop, that's exactly what I needed to learn today. Like it's such a tool and a platform that you guys have created. But that is kind of a question that I have is what would you say if you can pick just one is your biggest takeaway that if you were to end it all today, this is the one thing that you'd be like, I'm taking this with me and bringing it forward.
This is a fun one. And I'm almost, Rich and I fought over this for so long, right? And it ties into this, a simple comment, but I'll give just a little context. Rich, about 5 years ago, triggered me greatly. He said to me, Matt, healing, and I remember the percentage, Rich, healing is 85% mental and 15% physical. What were the percentages? Those weren't them.
80-20.
80-20. Healing is 80% emotional and 20% physical. And I'm like, bullshit. Sorry for the language. You're wrong. Not true. And we fought over this for years. And then I had the epiphany that he's right. In fact, I think it's even more than that because I look at myself and if I didn't believe from starting Take Boot Camp and interviewing people and speaking to people, if I didn't believe that I could get better, because I didn't, after my doctor said, we don't know, we can't help you, I accepted that I would be a disabled person for the rest of my life. And if I didn't have a change in my mindset and a change in my belief, I never would have gotten better. In fact, I would have gotten way worse. But it's very triggering to hear this as a Lyme patient because we feel abandoned. We feel that it's all in our head and that we're crazy and that's all, psychological. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if you don't believe you can get better, you won't get better. And that sounds very dramatic, but the most important thing to remember is if you don't think you can even make gradual improvements, you won't do anything to try. And if you don't do anything to try to get better, whether it's herbs, movement, diet, nervous system work, YouTube videos, laughter, simple things, whatever these little things are, improve sleep, drinking more water, less sugar, right? All these things have a small impact on our ability to feel better. And if we don't believe that, we're not going to get better. So once I realized that that's true, I can feel better. And I overcame that false belief. My healing started to, it was wild how exponentially I was able to heal from this disease. And, I credit Rich for that because he said it, he triggered me and we fought and we fought and we fought. And then it clicked and I realized you just got to keep trying. And if you keep trying, you're going to feel a little bit better and a little bit better. And it's not always linear. We know that. Sometimes you're going to fall back and sometimes you're going to come forward and you're going to go 20 steps back. But overall, when you look back, you are better than you were in the past and you have to believe it.
Now, Matt, when you say sorry, Cassidy, apologize. You could go first.
I was just going to say a little side note there. Rich has also made the same comment to me and it also triggered me, but he's also right.
Yes.
He is also right because that's also how I go about everything. I'm like, if you don't 100% believe that the treatment that you are going to do, like I will never look at someone and say that treatment is stupid. Why are you doing that? Because if you believe 100% that treatment is going to work, I believe it can work. And you just have to keep having that. I think it's so interesting you brought up earlier. People always tell me that I'm a very positive person. And like in here, it's not normally like that. But then when I say things like this, I'm like, no, it is because I just believe that it's going to work. Like the treatment that I'm doing right now, I'm back on a PICC line doing my IV antibiotics. And guess what? It's working because I believed it would, but also it's like biologically, I think, I don't know if that's right. Rich, don't yell at me. I'm not good with the scientific terms, but it's working.
Don't worry. There's not much yelling on this podcast, I don't think. Not yet anyways. We'll see though. But actually, Cassidy, I've got to let you go first because actually that's exactly what I wanted to still talk about is for the people listening, the triggered. Because I know myself, I've been triggered. It's like, go back to work. Can't you go back to work? Can't you come do this trip? And I get triggered. And for me, the reason why is because I'm doing my best. And that's what triggers me. I'm doing my absolute swear word best. And so you're looking at me saying my best is not good enough. This is my triggered voice talking. So what was the triggering aspect of that for you guys? And then we'll kind of loop back around, because I did find a way to sort of come back out it, but I'm curious for you guys, like what's triggering in that type of stuff for you guys? What does it feel like to be triggered?
Yeah, I can say, and I can give you a couple of examples of when I've been triggered. And I think triggering is it's a very distinct feeling, and I'm struggling trying to find the words to describe the physical feeling, but there is a physical feeling to it. Like you feel it inside in your core. It's almost like everything compresses in, and you just kind of like sink. You feel like you're sinking. It's just a weird feeling. And now that I'm able to identify it, I always try to spin it and say, well, why am I feeling this way? But, comments that would triggered me, we just talked about, hey, it's 80% mental and 20% physical. Because if somebody says something that implies it's all in my head, that was very triggering, right? And now I can have an intelligent discussion with somebody and say, hey, look, it's a psychological component. It's a real component, but it's just a component, right? But it's an important component. But we're here because of a variety of reasons. So, I remember, because I was a very, very avid runner, as Rich said. So I went from running 10 miles a day to having a grand mal seizure at work, being taken away to the hospital in an ambulance, and then trying to go for a walk with my brother 3 houses. And I was so sick, I had to come back, and he had to help me back to the house. 3 houses after running 10 miles a day. And I remember a comment from my uncle, out of love, right? This was not meant in a way to be triggering, but he said to me, hey, Matt, what if you just push yourself? Just go run a couple of miles again. You can do it. You just did it a couple of weeks ago. And I can tell you the feeling I had, that sinking feeling, that immediate nervous system trigger that I had was so strong, but it was said with love, right? He was just trying to help. He really believed that I just had to push myself. And I think we do have to push ourselves within reason. But at that point, I knew I couldn't go run a couple of miles. I mean, that was what I think helped me. That's kind of led me to where I was. I was pushing and trying to overdo. So it's a bizarre feeling, and I'm curious, Cassidy, how you're going to describe it, the physical piece. I think you actually physically feel it when you're triggered,
Yeah, I feel like I can feel it now just from talking about it, because it's just like, the body does keep the score. But like it's everything just tenses, and it's just like this is such a niche comment, but in Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 1, Bella has the venom running through her. I use this to describe it all the time to people. And outside, her body looks calm. She looks like she's asleep, but inside she is screaming, but you can't actually hear it. And that's how I feel when I'm triggered. It's just like, I can't actually express it outwardly because people would be like, whoa, but that's how it feels. Just like the internal, just like screaming, just like, believe me, please kind of aspect. And I think some examples of triggers for me, one that's happened kind of recently is like why can't you do that? But you look like on your social media, you look like you're doing fine. You're out with your friends, you're doing this. And I was like, what you may be seeing is a snippet of my day, maybe. And what you don't know is that 20 minutes before that picture, I was on the couch having a seizure. Or what you don't know is that most of my day is actually just spent on my couch. And if I am having social time, it's with people coming over to my house and sitting on my couch with me because I'm not going to get up because I can't get up. Or that like people have had to help me go to the bathroom in the recent months and stuff like that. But I'm not going to post that. I would post it on my social media, but like I don't. But like those kinds of comments from people, because Lyme is mainly an invisible illness. And so the comments when people can't actually see that you are sick, and then kind of like you were talking about, Matt, with it's in my head comments, because if someone is telling you like, oh, the emotional aspect, it's so hard to separate, for me at least, the like, oh, like my trauma, my emotions, that kind of thing, from I'm just making this up, when it's like, no, like I physically cannot move my body parts. How am I possibly making that part up? But that's not kind of what they're saying. But when you also add in that it is hard a lot of the times too, you can't see the Lyme, and that the testing that we have is so inaccurate and like so unpredictable with a lot of those things, that it is hard sometimes to not let those voices then creep in. And then I'm like second guessing myself. So it's just an internal battle when you have all of these triggers coming at you, that you then kind of have to, you put the shields up. And I think I have been in therapy for years, and I've learned a lot of tools that the stuff bounces off a lot now, but the triggering comments, they seep in there. But I feel like in the end, you learn from them and you grow from them, and it has made me mentally, physically stronger. That's my long answer.
So, Lacey, I'd like to answer the question that you had asked me and Matt, which is, what is the most important takeaway that I would recommend based on my 5 years of experience with folks in the Lyme community? And that is that the educational system has not taught you how your body works. And it's very important to do your best to educate yourself on the major systems of your body. And in my view, the most important system you should study is the neurological system. And if you understand the neurological system and how it works and how it controls everything, it will help you to understand a lot of what we were talking about here. And the neurological system really is not as complex as it sounds, because it really is a system where you are you are sensing objects in the world. You're then converting those senses into perceptions. Your perceptions then become your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, both your voluntary and involuntary actions. And the primary purpose of your neurological system is survival. It's survival software. And I think if folks in the Lyme community understood how the nervous system controls everything, and how we have only one or two presentations of our nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, or fight or flight, or rest and digest. And you will only have one presentation at a time, and you understand that it is survival software, you will now begin to understand how your body is going to work. So, for example, what Matt and Cassidy were just describing for you is being triggered. And what does triggered mean? That there was some threat that caused the survival software to be triggered, and they were now brought into fight or flight. For example, we have evolved to survive based on being parts of groups. When we were subordinate beings 200,000 years ago, before we became the dominant species on Earth, if we could not be a part of a group, we would be isolated and ultimately killed. So what was happening to Matt and Lacey when Matt's uncle, for example, was saying, Matt and Cassidy, when Matt's uncle was saying, well, why don't you just try harder? He was being isolated from the group. He was being told he wasn't trying hard enough. He wasn't being part of the group. And the same thing with what Cassidy was just describing. That will trigger you into fight or flight, or the sympathetic expression of your nervous system. And of course, what that does is it paralyzes your immune system. It paralyzes your digestive system. It puts you in a position where you can only do 5 things: fight, flight, freeze, faint, fawn. That's all you can do, right? So what's happening is people are unintentionally triggering your software and making it so that you're sicker, because your immune system is now paralyzed and these bugs are now taking off and causing you to be sicker, right? And we have all of these experiences that are happening in our lives, between doctors gaslighting us and telling us there's nothing wrong with us, between family members saying, well, if the doctor says there's nothing wrong with you, there's nothing wrong with you. Why aren't you trying harder, Matt? Between friends saying, well, you're not a good friend any longer. And now you just go through isolation after isolation after isolation. And that then starts to trigger all kinds of challenges, including grief, that make it so that you're getting sicker and sicker and sicker. So what I was saying to Matt and Cassidy, and I'm sorry I triggered you both, but you unfortunately you both needed to understand that that your neurological education has failed you. The educational system has failed you, and what we have to do to begin the healing process is understand the importance of how the nervous system works and what impact that's going to have on our healing, right? And Cassidy was really, I think, brilliant in the way she articulated belief, right? And how important belief is. And one of the things that we don't think enough about is the placebo effect. And what is a placebo effect? Well, a placebo effect is you getting better regardless of whether or not the particular protocol you were using is having that effect, right? Because what's happening as you believe is you're making both epigenetic changes, meaning your gene expressions are beginning to change, and you're making neurological and neural pathway changes, which are causing you to heal, right? But if you're triggered, if you're in fight or flight, if you don't have any belief, then unfortunately those changes that have to take place in your brain and your body are not taking place. And not only are you not getting better, you're actually getting sicker.
Yeah. To add to what you said, so people can get a real example of it, I started getting flare-ups of symptoms, Lyme and co-infection, all the other symptoms, simply from being very excited and happy about it. All my intense emotions followed the same pathway and would flare me up. If I was feeling crappy, like sad, something said, flare up, angry, flare up. So it was like almost every single emotion intense would flare my physical symptoms at the same time. My digestion, even before I got sick, because I worked in really high stress environments for a really long time, it exactly that. It diverts the blood flow away from the essential organs. It says, no, we need the blood flow elsewhere. We need to go fight a tiger or whoever you want to fight. I don't know. That's up to you. But yeah, so that's a real life example. For me, literally, I'd be like really happy one day. I'm like, wait, I'm flared up now. Don't be happy. Don't be happy. But one thing I will share quickly is that a really quick, easy little strategy that I started using is, because I'm a logical, like you guys know, I like to research stuff, is just that it takes the same amount or more energy to stay sick, right? So if you look at it, you don't look at it, because sometimes when people say stuff to us, it has truth, right? So you don't want to rid the truth, because that might be helpful. So something that's really easy is just to look at it that I'm expending the same amount of energy to stay sick or get worse. It's gonna be just as bad to do that type of thing. So to look at it more of switching the amount of energy you already expend slightly differently to get a different result. So it might something like in your daytime routine, for example, like being open, and it goes all into brain and cognitive flexibility, which is super hard for people who have never done therapy, right? Like they're sitting there like, oh, I don't have a lot of flexibility in my thinking even. So that can be done with the help of a therapist. But when somebody says something like that, obviously it's not a strategy. Sometimes people are meaning it with ill intent, but in your case, it wasn't. It was sincere. It's to help. So to make sure we still get the truth out of there, look at it, not that we're not doing enough already, because we are. I guarantee you, ask any person, they're doing their absolute best that they can that day. It's about what they're already doing and making tweaks to that. So the switches of the energy, the same way to get a different result, is kind of how I looked at it when if people, because I got those hard lessons from social media, actually, that hey, things might be keeping you stuck type of thing. So kind of openness to that. But yeah, I just want to share that one little tip. I don't know if anybody else has any little quick tips, like if you are being triggered, that help for nervous system or.
Well, I mean, there are many, and I think we have to look at two different types of triggers, right? I mean, there can be these events that are triggering us into fight or flight, and then they can be experiences that are causing us to be stuck in fight or flight, right? Some people will call that PTSD. Some people will call it, a sympathetic flywheel where we're just stuck in fight or flight all the time. And I think the techniques that you'll need to use when you have a short-term trigger are different than the techniques you're going to need to use if you are stuck in fight or flight. And one of the experiences that Matt and I had together, which is why it's been so wonderful for us to develop the friendship that we have, is Matt would say to me when we were working on something together, well, you're healthy, so why don't you try it first? And then if you don't get sick from it, well, then I'll try it, right? And one of the most powerful experiences I've had, quite frankly, is using the HPA balance from the Vital Plan. And one of the things that I kept saying to Matt was, Dr. Roll said that the herbal protocol that he's created that he's the most proud of was the HPA balance. I think you should try that, Matt. I'm sure I triggered him when I said that. And he said, well, Rich, why don't you try it first? And I said to him, okay, I will try it. And it has been a life-changing experience for me because I lived a life in fight or flight for various reasons. And as I started taking this herbal protocol, it started to balance out my HPA axis. And after living for over 50 years in this state of fight or flight, and having all of these all this adrenaline rushing into my system all the time. The minute I'd wake up in the morning, having all this adrenaline run into my system, what I learned from Dr. Rawls is that what happens is our cortisol receptors ultimately retard. And as a result of that, we have this rush of adrenaline that comes into our system. And we're now neurologically and chemically stuck in fight or flight. And the only way that you can get out of that is by now modulating your cortisol receptors. Well, guess what the HPA balance does? It modulates your cortisol receptors, which then helps you to have a more moderated chemical experience and allows you to get out of this chronic fight or flight. So if you have a short-term trigger, the way Matt was explaining with his uncle, who's a very kind man, by the way, a really, really kind man, triggering Matt, there are techniques like box breathing and tapping that will be effective in getting you out of that short-term trigger. But if you're in this loop of fight or flight, then in most cases, because it starts to have a physiological foundation, there are some other things that you're going to need to do if you're going to get out of it. Now, again, you're all younger people, so you would not have had the length of time in this HPA loop.
Actually, I did.
Okay.
So I actually because I want to say I was less aware. So that's actually Lyme and co-infections has changed that for me. I had exactly what you're experiencing, but because my cells were still in the threat danger response, I couldn't incorporate any of those supplements. So this is a feat adding in just vitamin Bs, for example. That's sometimes can help with, they get depleted with stress too. So I've now on year 7 been able to finally add back in all of the Bs except for 6 having previous anaphylactic reactions to them with IVs. So I was kind of what you're saying there, Rich. In my industry and such, I operated in that heavy stress. You wake up in the morning, you feel it. You're like, okay, I got to get up. Doesn't feel right, but I got to get up and do this. And then so the later end of your story there continues to my screen. My screen, I'm on the right side of you, is you tank, you go flat, nothing at all, because you have too much cortisol, and then the systems tank. And that's the later end of that. So I don't know if you tanked or not yet, but I hit the tank, and then I was like a walking dead zombie after that. So we had to do all the physiological repair, and it's awesome for people to hear that because you can help it, like you said, with the HPA, hypothalamic pituitary axis. For those listening, it's a little acronym
Adrenal.
That we use.
Yeah.
Oh, adrenal. Did I get it wrong? Adrenal.
Yeah.
Adrenal. Okay. So I was the later end of that. I didn't think that would happen in my lifetime. So maybe younger and older people have more in common than you think.
I second that, because I'm in the mindset of, I think we live in a society where everyone is constantly in fight or flight because we have so much access now, more access now than past generations to triggers. No matter, like, you wake up, the first thing you look at your phone and you see something and it's going to trigger you. Like, we just have that access right here all the time. And so one thing that I have, because I've been in the loop my entire life, and it took me, and I'm really bad with the years now, but years ago, my brother sat me down and had the whole sympathetic nervous system conversation with me. And that really changed things for me, and have been working since then to get myself back down. But then, like you said, there'll be mini triggers that will get you up. But if there's so many mini triggers, that adds up to be the bigger kind of situation. And I think that's what happened to me in the fall. I had just a lot of, because being chronically sick itself comes with its own triggers, but then the external triggers in the world and society add on to that. And I think that is what then triggered my relapse of the physical symptoms, but I've been working on it. But along those, with the one thing I have found, I think Lacey, you had asked for tools, is there's just little things. Like, I changed my phone alarm in the morning to a softer sound. So I'm not, because I would wake up every morning because my alarm was just the ding, ding, that was so loud. And I turned the volume down slightly so that I'm not being jolted awake so scarily now. And that has helped me in a little aspect. And I try not to go look at Twitter first thing in the morning. I just put on my music. I do a daily, a meditation every single morning before I get out of bed. That's just what would your perfect day be like kind of one. That's just okay, setting myself up, thinking of something very happy. There's like getting sunshine and just like the little tiny things, putting your phone on do not disturb, because even the little vibrations can be like a little jolt to your system. That's just, you don't need it. And this, like, it's something, just keep it more calm.
One of the things that I learned from Cassidy, I know Matt wants to weigh in, but let me just share this one piece. One of the things that Cassidy shared with us and she taught me was that she lost her ability to feel. Right? She said, I don't have emotions anymore. And she shared with me that she had located an emotion wheel that she referred me to. And that was a really powerful, again, enriching experience for me to understand how what happens is when you're constantly in fight or flight, you lose the ability to feel anything, right? It's just constant, rush of all of these stress chemicals into your body that you even forget how to feel. So that was another one of the things that was really helpful and enriching for me personally, when Cassidy gave me a language to articulate what was going on for me that I just didn't have, and a set of tools that I could use to try to now, when my stress chemicals were modulated, to now start to feel emotions and understand the different emotions and how they don't all bleed together for me. And that was, again, I've never shared this with you, Cassie, but I thank you for sharing that with me, because it radically changed my life after I had more modulated, stress chemical processes. I was able to now start to feel again and sort of relearn what each of those feelings were and how to read those signals.
Yeah. Cassidy, I don't know. I want to echo that, because, Rich has learned a lot from you, and he's had a lot of your quotes up on his board probably for years now, and a lot of things you taught him. So that has meant a lot to both Rich and I. But I do want to kind of, a couple of things I want to weigh in on here. The first one is that, Rich talked about when you're stuck in fight or flight, when your nervous system is triggered, it obliterates your immune system, which is true. But I think an important part to this is what Dr. Kathleen King teaches, who is the founder of Primal Trust, who we've had on the podcast. And she talks about the cell danger response. And just yesterday, she put up this brilliant Instagram story that blew my mind. I literally screenshot it and I zoomed in on it because it was so good. And it showed your cell. So your nervous system, your fight or flight response, and I know all of us, including Rich, have been triggered into chronic fight or flight, not acute, right? We've been stuck in that loop and we've had to take steps to get out of it. When you're in chronic fight or flight, your cells at the cellular level, which control your immune system, and every organ and system in our body are not functioning properly. And the cell danger response theory goes into how and why that happens. So people, I don't want to get too much into the science there and what it does, but it's a really cool concept and a lot of cool visuals out there from Dr. Kathleen King. But I think to answer the original question, how do we address this from both a chronic and acute standpoint? The chronic side of it, you need a lot, right? I think you need a ton of herbs, a ton of different things that work for us differently. And then, the acute side is a little bit different. So for the chronic, I'll say the HPA balance for me was huge as well, with just like Rich. That allowed me to overcome the fear to try new things and then to begin my real healing journey. But Rich, you failed to mention the CBD oil, because the first time I actually bullied Rich into taking CBD. So now I can say I probably triggered him. Because I'm like, Rich, take it. And he's like, no. He had to go out somewhere. I made him take it before he left his office. And he told me his skin was crawling after he took CBD oil. So I don't know what that means, but his skin was crawling. But it was such a powerful tool that Rich was getting better sleep. He was responding, less aggressively to people in the legal environment. And it helped me as well. So I think CBD oil and herbs, specifically the HPA balance, were our first toe in the water, dipping our toe in the water to nervous system regulation. Now that I know what it's like to be in rest or digest, which I frankly didn't know when I was sick, some common things that I think all of us should try to do are find tools that we can identify that sort of calm us down and help us have a different viewpoint. And you can almost feel it now in your body, right? So one of them is, I love just going out in the sun. So this morning I had some errands to run. I went to work a little late. And I sat in my car for 15 minutes before work because the sun was just shining in through the window on me. And for whatever reason, that sun just makes me so relaxed, right? I don't know what it does. I know there's science behind it, but I just sat there with the sun beaming on my face for a good 15 minutes. I was so calm and so relaxed. My nervous system was amazing at that point, right? So that's one simple tool that we can all take in at the right time. Another one is if I get really triggered or I'm just in a bad headspace and I just go for a slow walk. I come back and I just feel relaxed and calm and I feel better, right? We talked about the CBD, we talked about the herbs. I jotted down a list while you were talking of things that have helped me. The breathing techniques Rich touched on, and there's a ton of them. We had a whole bunch of doctors, including Dr. Plant from the Amen Clinics, do a Lyme hack just a couple of weeks ago on our platform. From box breathing to I call it the straw breathing technique to whatever, that are really, really powerful, and I do them often. I mean, I can do those sitting in my chair in the middle of a meeting at work. I can do them, and they are really effective at kind of calming down your nervous system. So the other one is intentional thoughts. When I find myself having these negative thought patterns, I will have to intentionally think about what I'm thinking and flip them and have, the glass half full approach and just say, well, here's a positive. And after enough doing that, and when you're triggered, it's really hard to do that because you're like, oh, screw this isn't going to work. Why am I doing this? But within 10, 15 minutes, you realize, wow, that really helped, right? So all these things are really simple, free techniques we can use, or low-cost techniques we can use to get ourselves out of this fight or flight mode, which at a cellular level is impacting our ability to heal greatly.
Yeah, so you touched on a lot of really important stuff there, including Dr. Katz's program, Parental Trust. But it looks like you have something there, Rich. Go ahead.
Yeah, so let's say I think, again, going back to the argument I was making before about understanding your nervous system and the important element, that being the most important system in your body because it controls everything. Matt was building that out, of course, because what our nervous system is our brain, it's our spinal cord, it's our nerves, and it's the connection to the body, our nerves connections to our body, and the signals that are going from our brain to our body and back. That is affecting us on a cellular level, and I think Dr. King has just very brilliantly helped us understand how that's impacting us on a cellular level. But if you understand your nervous system and you understand how to manage your nervous system, then you can put yourself in a position where you can both put yourself, stop yourself from being in fight or flight all the time, so that you're not suppressing your immune system in the short term, but also now become a goal-achieving person. Because, at the beginning of our conversation, we talked about Matt and I being willing to suck and how that's an important part of a healing journey. What is so triggering for so many people when they're looking for models to heal is they'll listen to our podcast and they'll listen to someone like you, Lacey, who has gotten very far in their healing journey, and they can say, I want to be like Lacey. That's the model I want to achieve. I want to start my own. I want to go on a podcast. I want to start my own podcast. I want to get to a point where I'm able to do that. But they're so sick that the gap between where they are and where you are is now triggering to them, right? So if we understand how our nervous system works, and we understand that gap between where we are and where we want to be when we're finding people to model is going to be triggering, that puts us in a position where we can learn how to use models, right? And that really is the focus of our podcast. Our podcast is designed to have people share their stories so that they can become models for other people, where what they're sharing and their experience is speaking to you and speaking to your spirit and speaking to your symptoms, so that you can now come up with a step-by-step plan so that you can achieve what Lacey has achieved, or you can achieve what Cassidy has achieved, without being triggered because the gap is so big. So it is important for us to find models. It's important for us to find people whose spirit allows us to now find someone that we can model, and then find out what the steps they've taken, and then stop focusing on the outcome, but focus on the steps that you're going to take so that you're not triggered, and get you to the point where you can be now the model for the next person who's been newly diagnosed, who has had similar experiences and similar symptoms to you.
Yeah, that makes sense, actually. And so just even knowing sort of, and for me, it was hard. Like, I didn't know quite how sick I was. I was a bit in denial, if I'm being honest. So sort of, yeah, going off that, how it is important to make sure that if you are following some accounts or listening to podcasts, that it is people that are, healing. It's not that you shouldn't follow the other accounts, because they're just as important and valuable, but to be getting those strategies of what got other people there. And yeah, it kind of what Richard is saying. Sometimes it's hard to know how sick we are. Like for me, I was numb and my brain wasn't functioning well at all. So I couldn't really tell. I did a return to to work, failed miserably, and then stopped again. So I was like, so I didn't know. I was like, I'm ready to go to work, right? And then nope, turned out to be a no. But yeah, go ahead.
Let me challenge you on one of the things you said a little bit earlier, since I've not triggered you yet.
Not yet. No. Go for it.
So one of the things you said a little bit earlier was that you are a certain percentage back to who you were, right? And I think one of the things that we have to be careful about in this community, because it is very triggering, is to look back at the person who we had been and want to be that person again. One of the things we learned from one of the brilliant people that we've interviewed a couple of times, Christina Consablo, shared with us, is that that's a huge mistake. And it's a huge mistake for two reasons. The first reason, she said to us, is that you don't want to be the person you had been before because that person got Lyme disease. Yep. The second thing that I want to share with you, Lacey, on that front is that there is a grief cycle, right? And when we're not the person we had been, when we have a traumatic experience, and Lyme disease is a traumatic experience, there's no getting around it, regardless of all the other things that can happen around it. Just the disease itself is a traumatic experience. Your body has to process trauma, right? And how your body processes trauma is through a grief cycle, right? And the first step in the grief cycle is denial. You are going to be in denial, Lacey, as you had just described. It's a natural part of your body processing trauma, right? Then after you get through the denial, then you're going to get angry, right? You're going to get angry about this loss, right? So you're going to start with denial, then you're going to get angry, then you're going to get sad, right? There is going to be this sadness, which hopefully will not roll into depression, but you're going to be sad. And again, it's a part of your body processing this trauma. Right? Then you're going to bargain, right? And you're going to be bargaining with yourself, and you're going to be bargaining with God, and you're going to be bargaining and making all kinds of promises. If you get through this, then you're going to finally get to acceptance, right? So most of the people that we've interviewed have all shared with us, they didn't accept that they were sick, they didn't accept that they had Lyme disease, and of course, all kinds of people around them, like Matt's uncle, say, just try a little bit harder, Matt, because it puts you in a position where where it makes it difficult for you to get through this grief. Now, while you're in this grief cycle, you're in fight or flight. You are in the sympathetic expression of your nervous system the whole time. Now, the question that we have to now ask ourselves is, how quickly can we get out of that? Because we can begin the cycle again. We call that the grief carousel, where you've now gone through the cycle once, and now you're going to go through the cycle again, and then you're going to go through the cycle again. And what is really dangerous is if the grief cycle becomes a flywheel, where it now develops its own energy. It's like, pushing one of those swings around, and all of a sudden it just now starts taking on its own. And now you're in chronic fight or flight. Now you're in the chronic sympathetic expression of your nervous system. Now you are frozen and you can't. And I think, again, the reason I'm challenging you, Lacey,
I'm so excited I'm ready, and I purposely am calming myself till you're done. So
because you're trying to compare yourself to what you had been, and this Lyme disease experience we've learned, Matt and I, where you're on a journey of transformation and you're on a journey of achieving, a condition of being health, is that what you need to do to get out of the grief cycle is you have to create something new. You have to understand that this is happening for a purpose, and you need to go through the changes that this experience is going to give to you so that you can serve at the level you're supposed to serve. And one of the things that I found to be the most powerful about interviewing the 450 people that we've interviewed is all but one person has said, I wouldn't give it back. I would go through it again, because I've become the person I was supposed to become. I've changed physiologically, I've changed neurologically, I've changed physically, and I'm sorry everyone for my dog barking in the background,
That's okay.
But I've gone through all the changes that I had to change so that I can become the person I've become, so that I can serve the way I was created to serve. And they strip off all of these things that our educational system and our society and our social system has packed on them. And then they become a pure version of themselves, and they now begin to serve at a really, really powerful level. So what I want to challenge you on, Lacey, is this feeling of comparing yourself to who you had been.
Yes.
You're
Okay,
supposed
so
to be a better version of you, and you are a better version of you. So you're not just 75% to where you had been. You're 175 million% better than you had been before.
Past in other ways. And I should clarify, actually. So let's start there. So I guess, because yeah, it's vague when I say about 70, 75, 78% healed. People can fill in their own conclusions of what that means, right? If I don't specify. So for me, that's referring to sort of the physical and emotional and neurological symptoms more so. In terms of wanting to be back to that person didn't manage her stress well. That person didn't set up strong enough boundaries. That person stayed in nervous system terrorizing environments because that's what I was used to. So I definitely, there's a lot of things I can't go back to. And to be honest, I do feel like the same, but a completely different person in many senses. And so yeah, good to clarify that to people, because I'm not striving to be the same as I was. I don't really even remember her, I have a disconnect still. Like I'll say her, it's because when I got sick, it was like a complete hard boot, like wipe out my memories and everything. So I couldn't even remember my most cherished, like I played college volleyball. Couldn't remember what it actually felt like to be on a team, or that I even did that. And that's starting to trickle back in now as I'm de-thawing. So I definitely don't want to go back to her because she wasn't on the right path. Like I love her. She's awesome, her. But I don't want to go back to that. I can't, because even as I'm healing, this teasing out that we'll say 75% just of like symptoms, not going back to who I was, it's like a couple forward. But if I push my nervous system too hard, it throws me right back. It's like, no. I felt the need to shake my finger in the screen really intensely for you guys. No. And then it shoots me 10 feet, like regressing. So I'm like, okay, I get it. You want me to take care of myself, this entity, much, much better. And you're not going to let me get around it in any shape or form. I don't know who they is, because I just am, whatever. So 100%, I can't go back to that. I was doing the things, like really great things. Like I was working in health, I was helping people, mental health, all the areas that I was in. But it was not quite what I dreamt of. I'm getting to what I dreamt of now. So to be honest, I'm another one. I wouldn't throw that up. I wouldn't change that for the world, because I can take care of myself better. I can set boundaries now. I can just, it's a free canvas now, and it's awesome. So there is something to look forward to. Now with the grief,
and you can serve us all better because you're a more pure version of what God created you to be.
Yeah, exactly. I just feel aligned. And so even struggling through like physio type stuff on the floor, I'm like, this sucks. I hate physio. It's very boring to me. But I'm like, I had a brief moment, and I was laying there and I was like, this is what it feels to struggle and have it pay off for the right reason. It was like, what? Like just sat there and then cried. I was like, oh, okay, yeah, crying now. So anyways, going to the grief, because I don't want to take up too much time on this. I love that you brought up the grief, because I've had some ponderings about grief myself, and they do align with what you said. But adding on to it, I would argue that there are part of the problem with these illnesses is there's not one grief cycle, because one grief cycle, as you know, it fluctuates, it comes in waves. Eventually you come to the end where it's maybe a bit of acceptance, and it doesn't hurt quite as bad. It still hurts, so you wind up there. But we have not one grief cycle started about the loss of our job. We have the loss of our family. That's a grief cycle. So what I'm teasing out here with the grief cycles is it's grief interrupted. Every grief cycle gets interrupted and never fully has the chance to actually play out. And it puts us into something that human beings query. You guys have more like the evolutionary type theories, is that we're human beings meant to be constantly adapting this degree with symptoms and grief cycles, and not being able to actually process the trauma, because we never actually get to finish a grief cycle from the start. So I'll just leave that there, let you guys jump in.
So I'll share two things with you, and this is just based on interviews that we've done. We actually had the experience in one weekend where we interviewed two actors, an actor from the U.S. and an actor from the U.K. And it was just coincidental that we interviewed both people in the same weekend. And the American actor, whose name is Kim Director, shared with us that one of the virtues of having her background as an actor is that she was constantly reading for parts and being rejected, and then reading for another part and being rejected, and reading for another part and being rejected. And what she had to learn in order to survive in the theatrical world was to process grief quickly. Mm-hmm. And what she shared with us was, because she learned how to process grief quickly, it allowed her to do the same thing when she received her diagnosis and get onto her healing journey faster. That same weekend, we interviewed another actor from the UK. I'm not going to mention her name, but what she shared with us was that she was stuck in the grief cycle for so long that she couldn't begin the healing journey. And it wasn't until at one point she looked at herself in the mirror and saw what she looked like that she finally had, I keep calling it the moonstruck moment, where she sort of slapped herself and finally got out of that grief cycle so that she can begin to heal. But it took her many, many years. So it's important to understand that what we're talking about here is going to be emotionally and physically paralytic to you and your healing if you're stuck in this cycle. Another thing that we had learned from one of the brilliant women we've interviewed a couple of times, Heather Glovac, is that when you're diagnosed with Lyme disease and you begin to interact with the community, you actually grieve into the community, right? And you're grieving the loss of your social contacts and your family and your job, and you're leaving the world you had been in before, and you're coming into a new world, and you're grieving because you're coming into the new world. She said you then become comfortable in that world, and you develop your new friendships, and you develop your support system, and then at some point you leave that community, right? And you go on to live your life outside of the Lyme community, and you have to grieve out of that community because you're suffering loss again. And that was when and again, I encourage folks to listen to Heather Glovac's episodes because she is so deep and she's so smart. And that was a really informative understanding that we had to develop, because Matt and I are in this community. We've been in the community for 5 years. So it's not like we've left and had to grieve it, but at some point, you are going to heal. At some point, you are going to get out of this community, and you have to be prepared for the grief that you're going to feel when you leave the community, the way Heather shared with us.
Yeah, good advice.
I feel like I'm bringing it full circle from this whole conversation that we've had. We talked earlier about how there's always like a healing moment when you're on with the Tick Boot Camp men. And as Rich was going through the grief cycle, grief is something that I have gone through. Like you said, Lacey, like there's multiple different grieving moments that I've had throughout my 12 years of being sick, when it's like, oh, I grieve not be joining the softball team the first year I was sick, or like grieve not being able to go away to college, just always little grief moments. But I have been in a full-blown relapse, like my first ever like real full-blown relapse, that I had to actually start treatment again when I had been in remission for years. And I was deeply stuck in the grief cycle for months and months and months and months. And that's something too that I think we've been saying all these like great little tools and things like that, but it's not like a easy task. So I feel like we're speaking about it like it's so easy, but for a lot of people, because the physical aspects of it as well, it is hard to get to the other parts. And the denial part was so big for me in the beginning, because I was like, oh no, I'm fine. Oh no, I'm fine. It's like my body's just like, you're paralyzed on the couch. You can't actually move. You're not fine. But it's the denial of, nope, I'm fine. And then moving through the steps was very deep in the sadness aspect of it for such a long time, when it actually sunk in, like, wow, I'm sick again, that kind of thing. And it really was kind of like a slap in the face, kind of like you were just talking about, Rich. One morning, I remember I was laying on the couch, and I had like started kind of like dabbling with like, okay, what treatments should I do? But hadn't really followed through with like what I should do next. And I went back into my phone, and I often will find videos of my niece and nephew and watch them because they make me happy. And I found a video of I dance around my kitchen. Every day I would send my friends videos of me dancing around my kitchen in my apartment, and I hadn't danced in months. And that was when I was like, wow, I miss that. I miss being able to do that, being able to have that energy. And that was kind of the slap in the face moment for me when I hit the acceptance of kind of like, yep, I'm going to keep this train moving and we're going to get the healing that we need. And I called my doctor that day and started my treatment plan. And so like but it took me months to get there. And within that, I had several different moments of grieving. And even yesterday, I think it was hit like another leveled up in the acceptance. I remember I was writing my journal last night, started crying because I wrote in my journal, like, I have so much life to live and I'm so excited to live it. And if you would have asked me 6 months ago, 5 months ago, 4 months ago, I wouldn't have said that. And it's just like a totally different mind switch situation. The physical shift then came along with it too. So bringing it all back. Thanks for helping me have that come to life moment right there, Rich, that I was stuck in the grief cycle.
So I think it is important to understand that we can our grief cycle could become a carousel, it could become a flywheel, or we could be stuck in one of the steps. And one of the virtues of understanding that it is a cycle is that it can help us to get unstuck when we're stuck at one phase, right? And like one of the biggest phases, one of the most challenging phases is that denial phase, right? Where you deny that you're sick. I can't tell you how many times, Matt and I have interacted with folks in the community where we say, well, sound very Lyme-y, you may want to consider Lyme disease. And they're like, I don't have Lyme disease. You think everybody's got Lyme disease? Well, because they're at that denial phase, because they, and it's natural. It's natural that they're processing the trauma and they're stuck at that phase. But, again, the virtue of understanding, in my view, Lacey, of understanding the cycle is, for example, if you're stuck at sadness and it's now developing into depression and you haven't gotten through the cycle, right? You talk about not completing the processing of the trauma, and there are a number of different traumatic events where you have to get through it over and over and over again, is that once you understand what the cycle is and you understand where you're stuck, that helps you to get through the process of the cycle so that you can get to creating this new person, which quite frankly, I'd argue why it's so important to work with a mental health professional when you are on a Lyme disease journey. You need an outside person who is professionally trained, in our view, who can help you to understand where you are. Are you in a flywheel where you're just getting through it over and over and over again? Are you stuck at a particular place? And what are the tools and techniques that you can use to get through that grief and process that grief so you can begin the creation of the new person and the healing journey that you need to go on?
That's such a nice way to word it, actually. Like, it's just to get to the next stage of your healing, to process it, move forward and become who you're meant to be, is such a nice, positive way of viewing it. And it's, in my case, it's very true. So yeah. Anything that you want to add down there, Matt? I don't know if
one of the things I've been thinking this whole time is, I think it's important for us in the community if we're able to recognize if we're in a certain stage of the grief cycle, right? Because if you are in the anger stage and you're looking at people who are angry Lyme patients, you're only going to get deeper into that stage and it's going to be harder for you to get out of it. And I've seen that in my own journey where if I'm in the denial stage or if I'm in the bargaining stage or the depression stage, whatever it is, if I'm following people or being influenced by people that are at the same stage, it's making it harder for me to progress. And I think it's also possible to go backwards, right? Because I've seen people who are just very angry on TikTok, especially on TikTok. And you see it and it's almost like it pulls you back, right? Like you've made some progress and you get sucked back down a little bit to the anger stage. So I think we need to be mindful of where we're at in our healing journey specific to the grief cycle and try to avoid content from people, I should say, that are in that same stage or maybe even a stage that we've progressed beyond, because it can hinder us, not help us if we're consuming the wrong type of content on social media specifically.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely makes sense. I will add one last little piece to that, in that for the super numb. So I was numb from like the trauma, all of that, the grief, but also the neurological aspects. Like I couldn't actually feel a lot of tissues and organs in my body. For the numb ones of us, if you work with a therapist, you might be a little bit slower, because I couldn't even really feel anger. Like I was so numb. Like I can't explain the degree of numb. So I was difficult to process it, because it's helpful to be able to feel those emotions and stuff, and I couldn't feel it. So it was a little bit slower for me, but we did eventually get to all that processing and moving it forward. And it's great once you can do that. So patience.
So I think it's important to understand that there may also be a microbial element to, for example, anger. And we have to sort of put that out there for folks to consider, because we can often have a presentation that has different causes, right? So, for example, one of the things that Matt and I have spent a lot of time, studying because of folks that we've interviewed in the past is Bartonella, for example, is a microbe that in many cases is going to cause you to have rage, right? And and we've actually learned from Dr. Cameron, for example, that he said, hold on, it may not just be Bartonella. Lyme, certain strains of Lyme will likewise do the same, right? So we have to strike this balance between understanding that there are going to be psychological presentations that we might be able to may be able to resolve with some herbal protocols and some therapeutic intervention, but there are some that we're going to need. We're going to need some other types of either herbal protocols or maybe antibiotics to help us to beat down the microbes, so that we're not being triggered into these elements of fight or flight, which are now, of course, going to be immunosuppressive as well, right? And if you were to design, and I don't want to go down the biological weapon rabbit hole, because that could be a whole new conversation. I know we're going to start winding down, but I did just want to put out there for folks to consider that if they're feeling rage, it could be triggered by the microbes. And not necessarily, your neurological pathways.
Yeah, and Rich, not just Lyme and Bartonella. I mean, Dr. Omar Morales talked to us a lot about this from Lyme, Mexico, about just neuroinflammation, right? And what is the different types of neurological Lyme disease. And he gets deep into that. So if people want to learn more about neuroinflammation, pathogens causing psychiatric symptoms, that's a really good podcast to listen to. And we have plenty of others if people wanted to search on our website for this. We also had, Rich, who was the mental health professional from New York City? Help me out here. He was a really good top interview on this.
Dr. Leo Shea, brilliant.
Dr. Leo Shea was another great resource for mental health and anger, anxiety, depression, all kinds of emotions due to physiological root causes to mental health illnesses like Lyme and Bartonella, and even viruses and parasites, things like that. There's a whole other world to the psychological component as well.
So I guess because we are winding down, so we probably won't go too much in depth, but I'm just curious, so I'll just drop mine really quick here. So I mentioned there, I returned to work. I was not aware how sick I was. It didn't go well. I opted out and stopped again. So I hit a low. I hit a low mentally, and I felt like if I had to live in that state longer, I didn't have, at the time, the finances readily available, which I eventually figured out. And I felt like I could no longer continue to live in the state I was in. It's not that I didn't want to. So I just am wondering if we can maybe just take a little quick here time to let people know of some of the mental health symptoms Lyme and co-infection worsened or created for you along your journeys.
Yeah. So I can tell you, I never experienced a panic attack until I got sick with Lyme disease. And when it first happened, I mean, it felt like I was going to die, right? I mean, the fear, I don't even know how to describe it. If somebody's never suffered from an anxiety attack, I don't think words can describe what it feels like, because I was, in my 20s having this mental health crisis that I've never before experienced from Lyme disease. And I mean, that was really, really an eye-opening experience for me about how severe mental illness can be and how severe and crippling mental health conditions can be. And then, beyond the panic attacks, just the straight up fear and, ongoing anxiety from the illness of I'm never going to get better. My life's going to suck, right? That's just an ongoing thing. So that wasn't who I was before I got sick. So for me, it wasn't a worsening. It was just a new, like, slap me in the face type of scenario with my situation.
Yeah, I second that. I have my anxiety used to be like horrendous. Now it is much more manageable, but just like horrible anxiety. And I think one comes with kind of what Rich was talking about, like from the actual bacteria itself, but then also from the circumstances when you are put into an illness that is not believed, when you are like, is this a bioweapon? Is it not a bioweapon? When you have to know that you might have to go to a doctor that's going to gaslight you. How am I going to pay for my medications? All these things add on to it. So it is like the external kind of circumstances as well that can cause that. And then the depression aspect, I think I have been fully depressed twice in my life. And one was the first year after I had finally got diagnosed. And then I would say the last, like probably from September until what month? Probably like May or June, and similar thought process. And then throughout it all, I've had those low moments as well. Like you were talking about, Lacey, there's one that I always talk about, which was years ago when I was first going through my big bout of paralysis. I got periodically paralyzed for about 9 months straight, and just like every day, all day paralyzed. And that you can't do anything. So like you're just trapped in your own body. Mentally, I was fine. Physically, I couldn't even lift my head off my pillow if my neck got stuck in a certain situation. And then I started having seizures in April this year. And similar aspect of just like, I physically, like the losing the independence aspect of it all when you are a 26-year-old, and like my mom had to take me to the bathroom and literally hold me on the toilet because I was having a seizure while trying to go to the bathroom. And so like that strips you down too, mentally and physically as well. So those kinds of aspects, and have worked with medical professionals, have worked with therapists for years. And I finally started doing, I think I told you, Matt and Rich, that I'd started doing EMDR therapy last year. And that was super helpful to go backwards, kind of like how you were talking about earlier, Lacey, about how you talk about your old self as like a her. I kind of look at it that way. And that helped me too, of like a young Cassidy, and looking at her and being like, no, like it's actually going to be okay. Like look at the things that you can do, because the second that I hit those triggers that we were talking about earlier, I revert back into that little girl that was scared and didn't know what was coming. But it's like, no, actually, you are 26, you have your own apartment, you have a big girl job, you have your own friends, you are actually able to do all of these things, and you made it kind of to the other side. And yes, the road is bumpy, but those low points do come at you.
You're doing it though.
So
Rich, anything that you want to add in terms of what you've observed, or even anything, personal experience?
Yeah, no. So I'll come back and reemphasize my argument that it's important to. I think the most important system you need to understand is the neurological system. I think becoming aware of your own psychology and understanding the psychocybernetic loop of our beliefs, our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, and ultimately our results. And learning how our neural pathways are uploaded into our brain during the first 25 years of our lives. The first 7 years, we're not even aware of those pathways and the neural connections that are being made. During the window of time between 7 and 14, where we're aware of them, but we still can't tease out. I mean, they're just being uploaded, and it's just based on the experiences of the people around us, largely our parents, or at least our brain's interpretation of those experiences. And then, of course, having an awareness after we turn 14, but between 14 and 25, and how our brain may or may not be interpreting our experiences correctly, and the importance of recognizing that those neural pathways may need to be reorganized. And as Cassidy had said, and again, I know we're getting to the end here, as Cassidy had said, using a neural retraining program in part to retrain your brain after it has been reorganized by the Lyme experience and the trauma from the Lyme experience, but perhaps even reorganizing those neural pathways which were not serving you before you got sick, so that you can go forward with having a more healthy experience. So we can maybe have another podcast interview about that process, and perhaps why I'll leave this as a little teaser, why perhaps there are more women who are suffering from Lyme disease than men, and why that may be because of the way our society is uploading neural pathways into women in the way that it is not men, and why it may make them more vulnerable to this disease.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and drop, because I know we're pretty much out of time, but some resources, people that want to learn more about what Rich just said, because we've had a lot of the founders of various brain retraining and neuroplasticity programs on our podcast. So if you just search that on our website, you'll find a ton of them. Also with Dr. Brian Plant from the Amen Clinic, we touched on him earlier, but he really talks about how our brains develop at a young age. And then when things change, I mean, he blew us away with, the science and the facts and the hard evidence of what happens in the brain and what we can do to overcome that after chronic illness. So that's another great resource and podcast to listen to if you really want specific in the weeds details about these things. And I think Rich is right. We're going to have to do some more follow-ups here to get into the weeds in this discussion.
Sounds like it, or the weeds will grow out of control. Can you guys drop just like a couple word hints of what's next for you guys in terms of Lyme community, etc.? Or you can save it for another time, but just a little teaser.
We're happy.
Tease.
We've been, one of the things that I've learned is that the Lyme community is a wonderful community of helpful people, right? And I learned that from the very beginning, which is why I got called out or called into this community. But the other thing that I find about you folks who have gone on a Lyme disease journey is you will also challenge us, right? And it's a group of people who are very helpful, but also will call you out if you're not doing everything you need to do. And one of the things that's happened to us over the last couple of years is we've been called out by many people in the Lyme community who have said, you've interviewed 300 people, 350 people, 400 people, 450 people, and you must be observing patterns. Why aren't you sharing those patterns with us? And Matt, what are we going to do?
So this is something that we've been slapped around for many of our guests for the last couple of years, including people in Germany and Europe and Canada and Mexico, the US, everywhere. So we've just started, and the last couple of weeks we have been getting together, and Rich put together a studio, and we have been filming on site in a studio, developing a YouTube channel to go over all the things we've learned. So we're compiling all the lessons we've learned from all of our guests, the hundreds of guests we've had on the podcast, 1,000 of people we've spoken to in the community over the last 5 years. And we're putting together this YouTube channel to share exactly what we've learned, the trends, the patterns, the steps that we've taken in our lives to heal and feel better. And we want to share that with the community to make it more digestible. Instead of saying, hey, go listen to 500 podcast episodes to learn, we're gonna really compress it and give it to you in this new YouTube channel we're creating. And it's been a blast. And you don't really realize how much we've learned until we start preparing for these podcasts. And man, I leave every time I go, Rich, that was just so much fun. It was just so much fun. And it's fun because you realize there's really a lot of value in what we've learned. And once you actually, think about it, and, we do our prep sessions, we do our planning sessions, and then we record the official, YouTube video. And man, there's a lot of good information from all of you, Cassidy, Lacey, all of you, we have information from the two of you, from your journeys, and everybody we've talked to. And, we're really excited to get it out there because it's going to help a lot of people, very much like our Tick Bite Blueprint did in a much larger fashion, we believe. So we're super amped about it.
That is so exciting. I can't wait for that and to share it with others. So congrats on that. And I didn't get a chance to fully finish my horn tooting. That we just appreciate, Cassidy and I chatted in advance, what you guys have done and continue to do for the Lyme community. The effects of the trickle down are so much more widespread than you might even know. And I had to have you guys here. It had to be in my head. There's no other way. You guys had to be here for the home opener. I like to make sports references sometimes. So that's you guys. And just thank you so much for how you've affected my life and how Cassidy said you affected hers, and for coming and giving me your time, because time is so valuable. So I have to say the biggest thank you, and we appreciate it so much. So.
Well, we're blessed to be with two of our favorite people. We couldn't think of two other people we would love to spend a couple of hours with, and hopefully this will bless other people when they have a chance to listen to it on our platform, your platform, Lacey, and Cassidy on your platform.
Nice, awesome. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for everybody for listening. And so that's a wrap for season 1. Oh God, not season 1.
Episode 1.
Episode 1.
That's a wrap for season 1, episode 1.
Episode 1.